Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have James here. James, you're somebody that is trying to really make AI and this new technology accessible and just super useful for people. Not make it too complicated, create something that provides a lot of value and is easy to use, just like typical software has been. There's been so many creations in the AI space now, but it's all about how do we make this practical and functional and usable, and that's really what you're focusing on, and why you created CommandBar. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So where did your passion for like business and technology and entrepreneurship kind of come from? Was this something that you had when you were young? Did you always think like, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur? How did this kind of passion begin?
Yes, and so I grew up in Silicon Valley. So like, of course, I worshipped Steve Jobs. Like, I was the kid who was getting like the developer releases of OS X and like watching the keynote, staying home from school to watch the keynotes. Like, classic. And there were a lot of us at the time. My parents were also business school professors with like an academic interest in entrepreneurship. Like they studied Silicon Valley and tried to understand like what made it work. And so I have this memory of being like 6 at soccer camp, and they're going around the circle being like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember saying entrepreneur, and everyone was looking at me like, what the hell is that? Like literally like, is that a made up word? But I think then I kind of, so I always knew I wanted to do it, but I think I really struggled with what to work on. I think this happens to a lot of people where you have this like idea that like, oh, I'd really like to build a company, but you don't know what to sink your teeth into. So I didn't actually start the company until I'd spent a few years. I studied computer science, spent a few years working in finance, and then finally found something to dig my teeth into, which was ultimately CommandBar.
So like, how impactful was your experience? I think you were an analyst at Bain Capital for a bit.
Yeah.
How impactful was that? Just seeing all these different types of deals and companies being created to what you wound up creating down the line. Like, what did you really learn there that helped set up this foundation for what was next?
So many things. It's a phenomenal firm. I think if I had to distill it, I'd say probably the difference between a great business and a great product. I think as like an aspiring founder, it's really easy to like fall on over cool shit you see on Product Hunt and think like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever and it's going to take over the world. But then you go look at some of these like Leviathan software businesses that make a shit ton of money, and you realize there's so much work that goes into like, creating and capturing value that just if you're just thinking about the product all the time, you don't appreciate. And so I was just exposed to like a ton of great, some not so great businesses and the inner workings. And it's really like, I can't imagine a better business school like experience, because you get paid and you have access to private data, neither of which you have in business school.
So you decided to like start a company by the name of CodePost, and I think that you were trying to figure out a way to make it simpler for teaching computer science and things like that. Why did you kind of decide to go that direction? And and then ultimately it seemed like you kind of pivoted to something different. After on with what you're building now. At what point did you realize like, hey, we need to build something different here?
CodePost was, I'm very grateful for it because it was kind of like the seedbed, very much the seedbed for CommandBar. I think it was kind of a startup of convenience in the sense that, like, I talked about really wanting to work on something, and I left out a few bits of my career journey. So I left Bain Capital to join a crypto startup, which was an awesome project called Basis. We decided not to launch that project at the end of the day. So I was, unburdened of employment, which is perfect starter conditions for starting a company. I was with 2 of my best friends who were also with me at Basis, Richard and Vinay, who became my co-founders at CodePost and then CommandBar. And we started working on CodePost because it was something we built in college and had just kind of like gained traction. So we built it at Princeton. It had been used for years. We kept getting inquiries from other schools about using it. So we decided like, hey, we don't have a job. We want to do a startup. This thing exists. People want it. Let's turn this into a business. What ended up happening with CodePost was it was mostly just the 3 of us. We had no competitive advantage other than like building fast. So we were like on intercom all day. People would write in being like, hey, like I found this bug, and then like an hour later it would be fixed. Just like insane customer experience relative to what people could expected in ed tech. The downside of that though was that the product, although it developed really quickly, we were adding so many features because people were asking for them that it got like pretty complicated. And so the product ultimately became like pretty hard to use. And we were trying to come up with like a solution to this problem. And what we landed on was something that had started to emerge at the time, which was essentially like a search bar entry point natural language entry point to the product. So instead of like writing, long tutorial guides and reimagining our onboarding experience, we would just direct all of our users to the search bar. And we would just say like, yo, if you can't figure out how to do something, just search. So it could be like duplicate a course or, alter the rubric for an assignment, like whatever, just write it in words. And then it was the job of this search bar to like route the user where to go. Super basic at the time. So it would literally just like send you to the right page where you could do that thing, or it would open up the help doc that corresponded to that topic. So we built that. And then we were just like, wait a second, this is like such a cool idea. Like, why doesn't literally every piece of software have this? Like, this seems like universally useful, not just like a building block for our niche ed tech thing. So that's when we decided to start working on that. That's the idea that seeded.
So James, like you thought that would be the easiest way to kind of interact in general, just with like, were you like, you were thinking about AI at the time too, and like this would make a lot of sense to interact with AI? Was that kind of the thought process as well, or you were just like, this makes a lot of sense?
I wish we were, because then we could have started using AI earlier. But it was literally we got, I think, so much of startups is like luck and timing, and we literally just thought of this as like a thing that could make our product better, and then we thought, why doesn't this exist in the world? We had no like grand vision for how like our idea was going to intersect with how large language models were developing. So when we started the thing, it was literally just, it was like old school semantic search. We called ourselves the like natural language interface for software, but it was not AI powered at all. And then I remember like GPT-3 dropping from the sky, and we were like, wait a second, like this is our company now. It was a very special moment.
So how quick were we able to kind of pivot to this next phase once GPT-3 launched? Like, how long did it take you to really get up and running with this kind of new version of what you were building?
It was a pretty natural fit for us, because it was more about enabling the type of user experience that we'd already built. So it was more of like a back end change than it was like a full end to end like product change, product pivot. We really got after it though about a year ago. So like spring 23, when we launched our Copilot product, which you can call a chatbot, we call a user assistant, and we can talk about like how we think of it as being different than a chatbot. But that's like a true back and forth question and answer interface, and that's become our flagship product.
Yeah, I do. I definitely want to talk about like kind of why that interface is how it is versus like some of the traditional chatbots. Like, why did you decide to go that direction?
Yeah, so I guess taking a step back, like the whole premise behind CommandBar is that software, it's 2024, and still like often the primary emotion we have with computers is like frustration, which is like pretty crazy if you think about it. Like we've got these like magical things, but we have these experiences where we get into a product. Everyone, loves to shit on certain products. I won't call anyone out by name, but like whether it's an issue tracking product or a CRM, whatever, we all have that experience where it's like, there's so many, menus, there's all these words I don't understand. I can go to the help center and like read walkthroughs, but that's like really tedious. I don't have time. I'm using 20 other products. So the premise of CommandBar is that shouldn't be the case. The two best tools though, that we've come up with as an industry over the past like 20 years to make software easier to use and to teach users are chatbots and pop-ups, both of which are extremely annoying, which is crazy because these are like the two tools we use to help users. So I'm sure everyone's had that experience going to a product. You get this like big interrupting pop-up that's like, yo, welcome back. Do you want to take a tour? And it's like, no, get this out of my face. Like, this is exactly what I don't want to do right now. Or you're in a chatbot and you're going through this you're getting these like long generic answers that are basically no more helpful than a long document. You're just like, okay, how do I talk to a human, right? So what we want to do, the analogy we use is like, okay, imagine a world where every software company would ship a human to your home or office or wherever you're using their products, who's just going to like stand by you, and they have full context of like how you've used the software in the past. Is this your first time? Are you a power user? What are your goals? You can ask them a question. They're going to answer with that context. Sometimes they're going to just be like, yo, here, let me show you, take over the mouse, show you what you're doing wrong. Or before you even ask the question, they can nudge you in the right direction and say, hey, you're going on the wrong track. Or like, yo, what are you trying to do? You seem confused. So CommandBar is the software equivalent of that human, just embedded in software. So we sell our product to other software companies, and we exist as this AI user assistant embedded in their products that helps users use them. So a good example would be you ask a question like, how do I invite a teammate? You're in like a B2B product. That's a really valuable thing for you to do. Chatbot might be like, okay, step one, go here. Step two, go here. Like, here's how you navigate this maze. What our product can do is it can just say, oh yeah, for sure. Who do you want to add? So it can take the action for you. Or if the company wants to teach the user how to do something, which is often important, you don't want to just do everything on behalf of the user. It can be like, yeah, click here and I can show you. And then this cursor is going to pop out of the interface and it's going to be like, okay, here, let's do it together. Which we feel is a lot closer to the, non-annoying human user assistant dream. Maybe not the dream for some people because it's kind of creepy having a human. So maybe it's even better.
So how do you kind of go about convincing companies to work with you with your solution? Even from the initial stages, like how do you determine the right type of companies that, you think make sense for a startup like you, just still earlier on to be able to go and work with, and then how do you convince them and really ultimately sell it to them that this should be the right type of integration for you?
A lot of it comes down to ROI and just convincing them that like there's money to be made by using your product. At the end of the day, that's like the universal answer to this question. I do have a take on this though that I didn't have like a couple years ago, and I think a lot of first-time founders don't appreciate, which is you can have like the best idea in the world, but if you're not able to bat signal to people with money who want to buy things like you, it's not going to make a difference. Like you're not going to, no, you're going to be yelling into a void. So what we did about like 18 months ago is for the first, 2 years through our Series A, we were trying to create a category. We never really came up with a good name for it. We now call it user assistance, which I think is great. But we basically were talking about ourselves as like, oh, we're this new thing that's going to help your users, like category of one. And people would be like, oh, so you're a replacement for the chatbot company? Are you a replacement for the pop-up company? And we would be like, we don't care about those companies. Like, we're not those companies. Like the instinct is like, no, we're different, And then eventually we realized like, why do we keep saying no? We should just say yes. Like we thought they were when we heard that, we thought they were trying to pigeonhole us into like an old school box. When in reality is like the market telling us like, yo, we want you to replace these tools because this is where the money is. Like I can buy a replacement for that product. And so we started explicitly competing in digital adoption, which is the kind of horrible, nauseating name for the pop-up space. And then also in customer support as a first line of defense chatbot. And that has made all the difference because it's so much easier for us to talk to someone who knows about those industries and say, hey, here's how we're doing the job of those products, but better, as opposed to, yo, let me explain to you from scratch what we do and why you should care. That has been the single like most transformative marketing decision we've ever made.
Really interesting. So just the way you kind of phrased it and like looked at something, made all the difference.
Literally like showing up in market maps saying like, hey, if you care about digital adoption, like we're relevant for you in all our formats, like blog posts, SEO, analyst work, like all that stuff, instead of just talking about ourselves like without any reference to anything in an existing market.
Why do you think like now, James, is the time to really build something like this, like pop-ups? Like you mentioned, like they've been around for years, like since computers became mainstream, pretty much. Like why is there an opportunity now to really make a difference in this space?
The obvious answer is like because we couldn't do a good job before because we didn't have this AI infrastructure layer. So a lot of what we do is we pay OpenAI a lot of money every month to power our experiences. They're just, so much more personalized than they could have ever been in the past. That said, I do think, and what we started the company kind of before that trend was clear, there were some other things we saw that we felt like were, leading to this kind of like crescendo of user outrage. One is like, we just use a lot more software products than we used to. So, if you used 3 tools in 2002, maybe you use like, there's some stat out there. I think we use like 40 products a week, digital products a week or something like that. So there's a much lower attention span to like learn everything. Also, we just have higher expectations broadly. Like everyone talks about, the consumerization of enterprise. We have beautiful enterprise software now, like Notion, that shows us like, using products doesn't have to be a pain in the ass, which I think has made overall UX just a higher in the consideration stack for any software vendor. And they can see like, if users are happy, it flows through to things like retention and upsell. So I think those were kind of bubbling along, over the past decade. Also over that period, I think people have just gotten increasingly fed up with pop-ups. Like I don't remember the first pop-up or the first chatbot that I experienced, but I probably thought it was like pretty cool. But there's this tragedy of the common situation where people just rely on them because they're the only thing we have. And if you look at a company, my favorite is when you see a company that ships multiple pop-ups. Maybe you'll get like 2 pop-ups and then the chatbot will like also be talking to you at the same time. And you're like, dude, this is just multiple teams shipping their own things because they're incentivized to do so. And all those experiences, I think, have just eroded user trust in these experiences, which makes them ineffective. So I think the combination of all these things makes us feel like it's time to make software not annoying.
So like, on more of a higher level, James, like how do you view our relationship with AI, like as humans? Like, is it going to be a one that we, kind of like what you're building at CommandBar, it's very much like an assistant, it's an aid. Like, how do you view this relationship kind of increasing? And what do you think are some changes that will occur in terms of what you're building because of how the increase in the potential of AI is occurring currently?
So hard to tell. I think a lot of people in our space like pretend like they can see around the corner and know exactly what GPT-5 is going to be like. And I think there's like a handful of people in the world who actually can do that. So I'm not going to pretend to do that. I think what we're doing is we are assuming the scaling hypothesis, assuming that great models are just going to continue to come down in cost, and build with the mental model of like what would a great human do in this scenario. Like imagine you hired like the world's best support agent. They remember everything about the user. They can memorize all the articles, everything your company's ever published. Like what could that user assistant do? How could they help your users? And we're always just asking ourselves that question, like, what would a really smart human here do? And we kind of like, there are some ideas where the models just aren't there yet. And so we park the idea, but we're always coming back to it just because the pace is so insane. I think it would be a mistake to like, look, it's possible that in a year we're going to find that this stuff plateaus and it's like, oh, oops, a lot of that stuff we're assuming was going to work because the models are getting better doesn't actually work. I would much rather be on the other side and like, oh my God, these things are getting way better than we expected. I'm so glad we assumed that. So we're just kind of taking like an aggressive product posture today.
That's a good way to look at it. So like, just the last question I have, James, like at this point, in your career, like, and just overall with CommandBar, like what are some of your like long-term and short-term goals that you aspire to accomplish? Maybe things you haven't done yet that you want to be able to do now?
Oh gosh. Is lame entrepreneur answer, but like I think there's a huge company to be built doing what we're doing. And like, I feel really fortunate that we've like, timed it and executed our way to like actually have an opportunity to build like a big company that can influence a lot of people. One of the things that I've found really frustrating about building software in the past, like starting as a teenager, is there's this kind of sad law of gravity in software, which is that because users spend most of their time in other products, it behooves you to make your product look and feel like those other products. Why? There's a great article on this called The End of Web Design, written in like 2000. And I think it explains why products today look a lot like they did in 2000. And it's a sad collective action problem because why should any company internalize the R&D to come up with new UI, new UX building blocks if users already know the ones that are out there? The only companies that can like get around this coordination problem are companies that have a lot of scale, that cross products. Like we're very fortunate. Like we serve like something like 20 million end users today. Hopefully that's going to become a lot more in the future. And that gives us an opportunity to actually like in partnership with our customers, come up with new ways of helping users, new software building blocks, and see which ones work better and just kind of like run the much faster iteration loop than we've seen in the last 20 years. That's like a dream job for me, to work with like smart people on trying to make software broadly easier to use and have like the leverage and scale to justify that kind of R&D, like that's awesome. That's I wish I'd known I wanted to do that back in like the soccer camp circle, but I don't think I could have drawn up like a better role for me.
Well, James, I appreciate you coming on. Like, I'm definitely excited to see what you're going to do next. I think
Thanks,
that,
man.
building something now that actually solves a problem that's, I think, caused a lot of headaches and a lot of pain for many people, and trying to actually come up with a solution for it when I haven't heard, of too much of anyone really trying to do that is definitely exciting to see that, people like you are working on something to solve a problem in this space, and you're affecting millions of people already with it. So, I wish you much success and appreciate you
Thanks,
coming on. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Love the show.